Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast, where we focus on the people part of your business. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with rock stars. And I'm joined today by a CEO of one of the fastest growing companies that I've ever seen. I mean, you don't see numbers like this often, and maybe he'll share some of them or at least some growth rate data. But let me tell you briefly about Mike Pytlinski. Mike has a very classical CPG marketing background, which he has now leveraged into being chief executive officer of a company you probably haven't heard of called Nutridried that makes a product you definitely have heard of, which is moon cheese. It's one of my favorite snacks. You can find moon cheese anywhere. You've probably seen it at Starbucks. And this is one of the fastest growing snack companies, food companies that I've ever seen. And over the next 20 minutes, Mike and I are going to talk about leadership and culture and retention and recruiting and building the teams that he's learned how to do from Kraft. He was head of sales and marketing at Top Driver, which is a driver education program, even VP of marketing at Palermo's Pizza, and now at Moon Cheese. So with all that, welcome Mike to the show.
Thanks, Jeff.
It's great to have you. So why don't we start with just 60 seconds? And I really want to focus on just kind of you and your background and how you got to this leadership role as CEO of Moon Cheese. What kind of, when you look back over your career, what were the common threads, things that kind of led you from one step to the next? Obviously, I guess you're a marketer at heart. Is that right?
Yeah, I was, CPA by trade, but a marketer at heart.
That's a big change.
The majority of my career.
What led you to switch from being a CPA?
Really just the consumer dynamic of being in a store and watching people buy products and wanting to see how do you motivate that purchase. And
it was kind of fascinating to you?
Yeah, I mean, it was something as simple as one of my clients was made mayonnaise and salad dressing, and it was just I was finding myself talking to consumers in store, and how do you translate that in terms of there's a real job that actually does this.
Was it like the psychology? It wasn't the mayonnaise, so was it the psychology of the thing?
Exactly. It was much more the psychology of it, and seeing what motivated that purchase, be it color, be it the flavor, be it competitive, price points, everything. And it was like, wait a minute, there's something called marketing that does this.
So then you went to spend 13 years at Kraft, which is a phenomenal company, to learn the craft of marketing and the science of marketing. When you think about that time at Kraft compared to now working at a much more entrepreneurial company, what were some of the key things that you took away, not so much on the marketing front, but on the people front, from being at a world-class company like Kraft?
It's one thing I look back in retrospect that I didn't realize at the time just how many future CMOs and CEOs were literally walking the halls of a company like that. Literally, I look back at some of the teams I had. That literally everyone on the team, everyone on my Minute Rice team when I was leading that has either become a CEO or CMO.
And why do you think that is? It's not luck or coincidence. So what is it about the training or the groundwork that enables that?
I think companies like that do an awesome job of giving very seasoned people or actually new people coming out of grad schools and such a lot of responsibility, but with the appropriate level of supervision. So which is both a blessing and a curse, which is why you're getting that I think that experience to a point. But then there's ultimately people that were above you, and I think that's why ultimately a lot of those talented people exit companies like that.
Yeah,
they get a lot of that great training. A lot of the great discipline, which I take for granted now in terms of just processes that I've tried to implement, my current role, that in terms of evaluation, in terms of financial forecasting, as boring as that may have been at the time, it's like, oh, wait a minute, that's the discipline of a great company. So you learn that, but after a while, you do that for the nth time. It's like, okay, I don't need to do it here. I want to kind of do it somewhere else where I can actually help lead those processes and lead the organization.
You worked on products like stovetop stuffing, Minute Rice, honeycomb cereal, pasta anytime. It's got to be a little nerve-wracking, right? Because if, God forbid, you screw up one of these world-class billion-dollar brands, not only do you lose your job, but you kind of screw up an American institution.
Yeah, fortunately, never had that happen. But what was, I was lucky in the sense that I worked for folks who, one of the things that, I always, value was how do you make a difference? And the best way I would evaluate people at some of these legacy companies is how do you create programs that outlast you?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times in these situations, someone would create, they want to change the packaging every year because that's how I can make my stamp on something. versus how do you fundamentally change the business, be it, consumer driven program, be it a sales initiative, what have you. But it's something that if you can look back to, 1, 2, 4 years down, after you were on that brand, is an initiative that you created, is that still in place?
Right.
And that's where I think some of the more successful folks who are, leading some of those brands were. And I was, glad to say that I can actually point to many of those, kind of initiatives.
When you think about, because it would seem to me that you step into a brand like, honeycomb cereal or stovetop stuffing or minute rice, and all the product managers and brand managers ahead of you have tried everything. And then someone comes in and comes up with something, a big idea that catapults the brand to a whole new level. When you think about those people that successfully did that, what did they have in common? Were you ever able to figure out what was it that they came and 10 guys before them had failed, but somehow they succeed?
Yeah, it's, one is passion, in the sense of wanting to, you have to know those types of organizations come up with the idea, but also have just the desire to push it through the organization, because oftentimes you have to up, down, and around as well. Yep. But one of the hidden talents I've found, and I was successful in my career as well, which is know when to identify opportunity. One of my favorite examples is, I was helping run the customer marketing function at Kraft for a number of years. And I had someone working on my team who, saw, this, pallet ready displays that were thematic, something now that you would go, to a store and see a, s'mores, pallet, display.
Yep.
And he was at the forefront of starting that, literally would put all the 3 individual ingredients on that on one place, which sounds rather obvious, but no one was actually doing it. And what I was able to uncover is like, wait a minute, there's an opportunity here. It's not part of my job in customer marketing, but it's like, how do you bring these functions together? And it got to a point where we created a menu of these, and I built off the passion of this one person who was working at the Kroger account, where we eventually, it turned into a $50, $100 million business within the customer marketing function, to the point where we staffed it up and such. And we had different themes that would make sense. And that was the leveraging scale. The point here was, identifying where the opportunities are, and then how do you have the passion to actually bring that through across the organization?
But it sounds like also thinking beyond just the job description, right? Thinking outside your box on the org chart. People who accelerate in their career, and arguably we as leaders want to hire, are people that want to advance and want to move, not just in terms of promotions, but they want to take on more, do more, take on challenges, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, what I found the most successful folks are the ones who aren't just say, hey, go do X, and they go do X. Mm-hmm. They're looking at Y and Z. How do I add value to the enterprise? And it might be tangentially related to what we're doing, but it's they're exploring ways to drive value. And then my job as a leader is, how do I ferret that out? How do I identify some of that and then broadcast that across the organization? A great example, it went from something that was neither one of our responsibilities and became almost a $100 million initiative within a massive organization.
Incredible. So now I want to fast forward, right, from one of the biggest companies in the world where you spent more than a decade, Kraft, to one of the smallest companies in the world that's on fire and growing so fast, which is Moon Cheese. The parent company is Nutridried, but we'll call it Moon Cheese. A phenomenal low-carb, high-protein snack that most people I talk to have tried and like. First of all, how'd you wind up making this change? So how do you wind up at a company of this size?
Yeah, it was one of those that was fortuitous. You often say that some of the best people aren't looking necessarily, and I wasn't at the time looking for an opportunity, but through a friend of mine, who knew the senior folk at the parent company, knew that they were looking to make a change and try and elevate this the opportunity from they were running it as a tactical proof of concept or operation to now something that could be a CPG powerhouse. Mm-hmm. And they were looking for someone who actually has that background in more of a small, medium, and large background. I fit, and it was kind of a match made in heaven.
How did you know that you fit? When you think about I guess you could say the risk that the business took in a quote unquote big company guy like you, although you have worked at smaller companies too, you could have come to this Moon Cheese very small, leanly staffed company and said, wow, this is just too small. How did you know, and how do you think the leaders knew that it was going to work? Because it's a big issue. I see a lot of big company people fail at small companies.
Yeah, it was kind of a congruity of vision. The chairman of the parent company and I kind of hit it off quite well early on. But what I saw is what could be accomplished. The one that was a diamond in the rough in terms of the product itself and the technology was proprietary, et cetera. But more importantly, it was the people behind it and the people behind the parent company. And then as I eventually met the folks, who were, the ones who were, going to stay from a legacy perspective in operations and finance, et cetera, there was just a commonality of what could be accomplished. And all right, this was this little diamond in the rough, but more importantly of like, okay, here's what we could do, together to make that happen. Mm-hmm. And it was knowing that, okay, I've got a parent company that's, going to be there through thick and thin. And that's proven to be exactly the case, as we've kind of progressed in the last year and a half.
I know that this is a part of a public company, so you can't share forward-looking numbers, but just can you give the listeners any past data on how fast Moon Cheese is growing?
Yeah, it's one of those rare businesses that's literally doubled each of the last 2 years. It's gone from about 5-6 million in revenue a couple of years ago to 12, 13. The year prior to my joining. I joined September of last year, and we're going to be more than double again this year.
Incredible.
And looking at very aggressive growth into our fiscal 2020 as well. So maybe not in the same par, but it's rare that you see companies do that in consecutive years.
You see it sometimes in tech or SaaS or something like that. You don't see it in CPG almost ever. So what unique people challenges does that introduce, that kind of hyper growth as you joined, Mike, which was like a year and a half ago or something? Mm-hmm. What were the people pieces that you were thinking about? Obviously there were a lot of marketing things you were thinking about, but you could do those in your sleep. What were the people challenges?
Yeah, it was the insight I think I realized early on is how do you calibrate where you are in the company life cycle with the talent to match that? So there's, say 2 examples of what I mean by, in that respect. We've had, some great growth and we were growing even faster going forward. But I realized it wasn't quite the entrepreneurial company that, where you're just starting up and it wasn't, clearly mature. So we were on the front end of, of our life cycle, of our growth, and hopefully, a lot more to come. And what we needed was kind of a shift in mindset that, and I'll use one operations example. We had a great operations manager. It was kind of like the number 2 person at our plant. Mm-hmm. Great person, very dedicated, would come in on weekends, would kind of find ways to fix stuff, bubble gum and, sweat equity in terms of making stuff happen and, grease those elbows, et cetera. But he wasn't going to take us to the next level.
Right.
So he very quickly tapped out, and it was an external factor that led to his exiting the company. But we brought someone in who, really, has elevated, and someone you can see like, oh, this is someone who can, who's going to objectively look at where we are, make some of the hard decisions that are necessary and take us to that next level. So that was fortuitous. On the second side is, looking at the major growth for us, is going to come on the top line. It's going to be a sales and marketing situation. And kind of looking from from a same perspective on the sales side is, all right, I need someone who can, be entrepreneurial. We're still, 20, ish million range. We're aspiring to be far greater going forward.
Right.
Someone who can, who's not going to be afraid to kind of make some hard decisions and move aggressively to try and drive that. But concurrent with that, we need to drive some systems. We need to drive some processes. We need to have a strategy. So how do we develop that concurrent? And those aren't mutually exclusive. You can be entrepreneurial, but you can be strategic at the same time.
It's almost like a tweener type of stage, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or an adolescent stage.
Yeah. It's on the front end of growth. You're not quite a teen. So you're probably, preteen, and then how do you have someone who can, successfully work within both of those worlds is a very unique challenge.
So as you've made those changes and other changes in the organization, what advice would you give to listeners who are scaling a business? They realize that some of their existing folks are tapping out, Peter Principling out, meaning they're not going to be able to scale with the business. How do you respect and acknowledge and thank the many contributions they've made, but at the same time, make the tough decisions that you need to upgrade the talent or top grade the talent. Any advice on how to do that and find the right balance of humanity, but also doing what your job is?
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in transparency. One of, I think, the things that's been successful with our organization is that we're very open, both good and bad. Right now, that doesn't mean that you have to, you have to handle things in a professional manner, et cetera. Part of transparency sometimes applies to people, in the sense of, I think you have to celebrate wins and celebrate, things that people do exceptionally well. But you also have to have, some of the hard conversations of, hey, here's what's not working, and it might be something on a tactical level where you're trying to develop someone and address that. But I think in some cases what you're alluding to is something much larger of, like, hey, you have to have the hard conversation of, hey, here's how far you can get within our operation or within our organization. This may not be a great long-term fit. I've had those conversations both here in the current role and in prior operations, and done well. It's actually works for both sides. The person, I think, it appreciates the fact that, like, look, if you have their long-term development in mind, then it's hard for them to hear it initially, but it's beneficial for them in the long term. By the same token, then you can hopefully upgrade in the sense and get a better fit in terms of talent as well. So hard conversations, but the longer you avoid them, the worse they get.
Because then it's a surprise to the individual when the day comes that you need to part ways, and then you've really set them up for a world of hurt versus setting their expectations, giving them every opportunity, right? Maybe they'll surprise you and step up, but otherwise they start to understand that, this is not forever. As you started to make those changes, Mike, and you've probably done this along the way in other roles, what were the things that you look for in these replacements that, like you said, are kind of these adolescent tweener types that understand a startup mindset, but bring, I don't want to call it gray hair, but bring, some more of a playbook and structure and process. What do you look for? How do you identify those people? Is it a function of years of experience or things they've done, or is it DNA? What do you look at?
It's somewhat DNA. One of the core values that we've kind of recently established, in our operation, is someone who is proactive. And I'm a firm believer in, in particular in some of these legacy companies, you can get people who are reactive, who are waiting to be told to do something or waiting to execute. And for me, there's a huge difference in terms of being proactive. It means thinking ahead. What could happen? What are some of the risks, that we're looking at? How will you overcome those? It gets back to the example I was talking about before. You're not waiting, for someone to tell you to go execute and waiting for someone to go do something. You're thinking ahead. You're one step ahead of your function, your role. You're stepping out of that role as well. So that's something you can identify within experience when you're interviewing someone. It's like, all right, what was your role? All right, now tell me something that you did that was beyond that. Right. That you went above and beyond. And
what were the areas of stretch, right, outside their box?
Yes. So, and then you can see that, and on a day-to-day basis, that's where the DNA comes into play. Is I see this all the time, and the senior sales and marketing hires that we brought on board. The great part of, and the advice I would give new folks is, talent wins. So, and what's one good thing about when you get great talent is you don't have to manage them as closely, because if you can get to a shared vision and a shared strategy, then if you can give them some bandwidth to try and flex their muscles. You don't have to manage them on a hour by hour, day to day basis. That's one of the beauties of it.
Do you think any of that, Mike, is a function of the fact that your new head of sales, your new head of marketing, all spent time in, let's call it, big established companies, right, where you learn the fundamentals, but then also spent time in startups or early stage companies and understand the difference? I guess another way of asking is, would you take the risk on a candidate who spent time at a big company but had never spent time at a small company? You were going to be there for a small company. How big a risk is that? Is that a risk you would take?
For the absolute right person with the absolute right DNA, you would, but you'd go in knowing it was a risk. I went from a Kraft to, as you cited, my experience at Top Driver, which was, a few $1 million.
Yep.
Very, very different.
Yep.
I was literally, cleaning new, education facilities and washing windows, in that. Right. It teaches you very quickly how to be entrepreneurial.
Yep.
So
And you could have hated it. I assume you loved it, but you could have hated it.
It was great.
Yeah.
And it was a very, very different experience for me in terms of building a brand literally from the ground up.
Right.
So, for the situation you're describing, it comes with some greater risk, but by the same token, I think it puts that much more of an inherent, situation of evaluating the person's DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have people who are very, who would fit this profile, who've only been in larger companies, but it just, you'd want that experience in a perfect world of someone who's been, large, medium, and small.
Got it. It sometimes you have to take that risk, but as you said, you could have gone to Top Driver, hated washing the windows, and said, "Screw this! I'm never going to a small company again." And then you got to restart the search, and all that trauma ensues. Before we wrap up, as you think about, you touched briefly on the fact that you've kind of been working to codify the DNA or the values of Moon Cheese as an organization. How do you do that? How do you take a 10 or 20 or 30 person company and craft the words that guide you in your future hiring so you know the soft stuff that you're looking for? How did you go through that exercise, or are you still going through it?
I'd say we're still going through it. It's one, with me coming on as a new CEO, and like I said, we retained most, if not all, of our operations and finance functions, but it was the sales and marketing and HR functions that really needed to be created. What I chose was let's slowly build the culture, and let me as my role as a CEO helps drive some of that culture. But let some of that emerge. Let some of that, how we work on a day-to-day basis manifest. So I can talk transparency all I want, until people see it and live it and feel it on a day-to-day basis. Where, literally, I am having meetings, with the entire company. Like, guys, here's our vision. Here's how well we did. Here's how well we didn't. Here's what we missed something.
You're not talking about transparency. You're living transparency.
Exactly. Right. So, and I can talk about it for months and months and months, but until you're actually doing it on a day-to-day basis, that's great. I think one of the best things I can, sense was, when our operations manager said, like, I now have a sense of trust with you. And I can talk about engagement and accountability, but, it's manifested. We just recently created our, company values and our company vision. And for me, the best, example of the fact that, all right, we're getting there was we just had initial rollout of this. And two separate instances of very junior people in different functions came back with like, oh, this vision statement's great, but here's some changes I might want to make. Now, I might disagree with them, and there's many reasons why I don't think that what they came up with would make sense. But actually, I was thrilled that they felt like they could come back and say, something as large as our company vision, and within their functional role, they felt good enough that, like, hey, I have something else that I could contribute. We can have a good dialogue back, then in terms of whether this makes sense or doesn't, or we tweak it or what have you. But for me, that was evidence of like, all right, we're building the kind of culture that we want. People are engaged. They're accountable. Yep. They're going to hold us accountable. So that's why I said it was like, create the culture along the way and then codify it. So that's why I said, it's been about a year plus.
Yep.
Now we're saying, all right, what are we really here for? How do we want to do it in terms of what are our values as well? And it's worked so far. It seems to be working where people are reflecting exactly what we thought we wanted to accomplish.
It's so refreshing and fun to be able to do it when you're 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 people. A lot harder to do as the business scales. You get to 100, 500. Not everyone even knows each other's name. It's a bit trickier, which I would bet at the rate that you're going, Mike, that you're going to be on a path to that kind of success not before long. Mike, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. How can people learn more about Moon Cheese or get in touch?
Yeah, we will be launching a relaunched website on mooncheese.com in the next week or so. And I'm on LinkedIn as well, or at mpytlinski at Nutridried.com.
Fantastic. Congratulations again. Enjoy it. I can't say enough good things about the product. Listeners, you got to try this thing, Moon Cheese. Mooncheese.com. Thank you so much, Mike.
Much appreciated. Thanks a lot, Jeff.